This is a Maplesoft digital education podcast.
Okay, I'm here with Greg Dick. He's the Director of Outreach for the Perimeter Institute. So, Greg, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Jim.
Now, you've been teaching physics and developing content for physics for a long time, and I think you've been at PI for 8 years now.
Yeah, unbelievably. So I left teaching for 1 year, 8 years ago.
Yeah. Maybe give us a sort of just a snapshot of your background and sort of what led you to PI.
High school physics teacher for 17 years. In the process, developed some curriculum, so I worked with the ministry a little bit. We developed a new course. I ended up doing some textbook writing for physics. So I was
That's
always
with Nelson, right? Nelson.
With
Canada?
Nelson
Yeah.
and actually with McGraw originally.
Okay.
McGraw was the first to take the risk on the rookie writer. It was an incredible process, and it was that process where you just get to sit and contemplate how to put it together in the ideal scenario. You're working with a team of people, which interestingly when you're teaching is more rare than it should be. You sort of, when you're teaching, you're busy scurrying from class to class and day to day. You don't get to collaborate and work so methodically through things. Anyway, that process put me into that mindset, and then Perimeter offered an opportunity to spend a year to build one of the resources, and that was 8 years ago, and I just never left.
Congratulations. I know I looked at your profile on Rate My Teacher. My wife's a teacher as well, so there was one comment I thought really captured what we're sort of talking about today. They said, you were the best teacher they've ever had. It's just too bad you taught physics because they hated physics. I thought, yeah, that was a great capture.
You know, teaching it's so special. Kids keep you alive and young and ask all the right questions. I'm always humbled when students reach back out to say that, you know, things connected, and I appreciate that more than you know. How that happens, I don't really know. I think it's just an authentic passion for what you're sharing. And what I always told student teachers when I had student teachers was, good teachers actually answer the questions the kids are asking. And at first that seems rather intuitive, but it's not. Often you get a question, you know the set of answers you have in your head and you want to go right there. But listen to their question, and if you really listen to their question, it takes you to new and interesting places. And I attribute some of the teaching success or the connection I had with kids to that, I think.
I know we work with a lot of, typically more university level, which unfortunately, you know, quite often they're in a very large classroom, and it's very hard to have that one-on-one interaction. But recently where we've been able to introduce sort of some spontaneous testing of the classroom, and profs have said to me that they've been shocked. They've been taught a course for 10 years, and they just assumed that the examples they're providing are getting through to the vast majority. You know, that if they did a test, you would see a major grouping on the right answer. And they're just shocked, and that quite often it's just, when they do that test, A, B, and C, it's random. And it completely changes their method of teaching, just having that feedback.
The opportunity to let kids interact with each other, and that result doesn't surprise me at all. That they're shocked by it. We're shocked by it in a classroom setting where you have 25 kids. You sort of can read their eyes, and if you take the time to do that, you know when you're going off the rails. But even that can be so improved as you improve your teaching craft, to stop standing at the front and delivering and providing those collaborative moments, or those moments where there's less sage on the stage. And that's exactly what you're providing those professors in a situation that's much more difficult to create that space than in a classroom where you only have 25 kids.
Now, as a director of outreach, I mean, do you see your main mission creating materials that can be used by high school teachers throughout the world at that early level? Is that one of your main challenges?
Our outreach is students, teachers, and the general public. And in the student teacher space, the reason we focus on building capacity in teachers is because it can scale. Once you change the way a teacher delivers content or changes their pedagogy, once you change that once in their life, for the rest of their career, every kid that they encounter will have that better opportunity. So it's the scalable piece, and teachers share and share and share and share. So that's why we've targeted that piece, because it feels like there's a real scalability to it.
You're a small gear and you can run a lot of other gears.
It's all done on the backs of the great teachers that exist around this planet, and their willingness to reflect on their craft, to change their craft, and to collaborate with each other.
Our particular interest is, whether, I guess my question is, what do you find are the best materials? Are they digitally based? Are they paper based? Is it a combination of the two? I mean, I'm very interested to know what is working now and how you see that changing.
Our strategy is sort of threefold. Create the content, and the content, it has to be digital so that it can get places where it needs to go and scale, for sure. And we weren't originally digital. I mean, we made nice hard case kits which look great, and I like to put them on the shelf, but at the end of the day, that's a lot of expense and weight you can't ship around the world. Jiggling electrons is much more efficient. So the content for sure needs to be digital, but it's not necessarily an interactive digital thing. It might be just a set of instructions for a teacher to use, but it can be all of those things. Then there's the face-to-face, where that interaction with teachers, that training of the teachers to use the resource, and then they go back and they have face-to-face interactions. That's all very important, but it too is limited unless you have that other digital component. And I think the biggest change that we're anticipating, the biggest change that we're already seeing, is the authentic ability to collaborate in a digital space. It removes the barriers geographically. You can be there really quickly. I just came out of a colloquium at Perimeter, and a Professor Gopnik does research into sort of learning, and she made the point that kids are very good at exploring all the different possibilities. And they explore all the different possibilities, and from an adult's perspective, that's very inefficient. We want to get to an answer, but you actually get to better, more innovative answers by doing that, and we lose that over time. Creating an opportunity to explore all those possibilities is what we try to do in science. You create an adult daycare. And what I took from that in our education space is you have to lower the cost of that collaboration time, and I think that's what I was thinking about that. That's what digital will really be able to do. We can honestly work with teachers in Brazil or in Singapore or in Finland instantly without the expense and the infrastructure. It's just a conversation and a place where people can get together.
Well, I know, especially in sort of the university, college, and up level, we're seeing a lot of major shift to online education, online only, quite often. And one of the big assets a student takes away from his educational experience is that set of friends and associates that they are referenced to, like they're part of that educational feeling, and that connectivity is really a big value. And so we have spent a lot of time thinking about, how do you make sure that the student is connected to their educational experience, or how they connect to the university, to the college, and what you're saying is really the next level, how you connected to that structure of experts in the field.
Yeah, and it can be students in a like-minded project. It can be the educators with desire to bring their subject to life. It can be the policymakers trying to put things together, and it feels like creating digital platforms that truly let that happen. That's the future.
Do you try to measure feedback on how well something is working? I mean, do you see that? And we call them typically digital assets. And the reason for the name, as opposed to, we'll say, courses or textbooks, is that we're not trying to decide how an educator will use that asset. The different educators may use it different ways, but we're trying very hard to measure the effectiveness of those assets. And there's many different ways we're trying, like time spent, when you can be too much, too short, comprehension, you can actually test in line. How important do you see that measurement aspect?
It's an ongoing challenge for us. I think it's very important. You're probably quite a bit further down the path in your thinking on that front. For us, the first metric is numbers and reach. We want to know, people are using it and engaging with it. But that data comes back, and it's limited in you know the impact in terms of numbers, but in terms of changing the way is their understanding deeper. That we lean mostly towards anecdotal from the teacher or survey responses, which is something. There's an exchange of information there, and we have a sense it's going in the right direction. That's why teachers are using it. That's why students like it. But the more we could learn about if this particular activity, helps the deepen the understanding of wave particle duality compared to this one, that would be gold, and that's just really challenging.
Well, I think, like in my opinion, the next 5 years, that's going to be the major difference. We're going to be, I think most, even 7 to 12 level, as well as university, will be awash in data. If anything, maybe too much data. I think you're going to have to tease out, what is working and what is not. But I'm hoping that, we'll have, and it's even now, and we're at early stage, maybe 100 or 200 courses, but each course has a couple hundred kids per term, so the numbers really add up, and each course and has each section that they look at. So you're awash in this data, and we're definitely going to have to develop AI techniques to identify learning breakdowns and identify what's working to point. Hey, go fix this. You're losing kids at this stage. But yeah, I do see that for the first time, maybe in the history of education, you can actually measure how well it's working. And I see that as a big change in the next 5 years.
That's talk about removing hurdles, because now the hurdle to get to even the simplest concept, understanding change or growth from a particular activity, to have a control and have a teacher's not going to teach it one way in one class and another way in another class, especially if they believe one way works better. Where here, you'll have that data flowing in.
And not only, like even within the same class, you could potentially have a different path for each student. And I think a lot of the data is showing that, we used to think there were slow students and fast students. It's much more varied. There'll be fast students in areas. But yeah, each student could potentially take a different path through the material. You would get to a competency base in that subject and allow them to move on, and potentially much faster than they're moving today, or maybe you spend more time with them.
And that, to me, right away rings a bell back to mastery learning, where ultimately we want to be, but it needs to be so differentiated. Every student needs to get there their own way. That sounds fabulous.
Now, do you, I'm assuming at a high level, okay, and this is my assumption, I may be wrong. First of all, I think, PI is unique in Canada, maybe unique in the world, as really being a showpiece for the promotion of physics and thought, and a leader in science, especially now. But do you see developing, do you see one of your goals of pulling more of the population, more kids, into physics? I mean, is that one of your high-level goals?
It honestly isn't. It honestly isn't. That should be a byproduct of what we're doing, where we really are trying to raise the opportunity to increase scientific literacy, so that the globe, and that's very aspirational, but let's aim as high as we can go, truly has opportunities to engage with science in a way that they'll have an appreciation for how science works, how we are able to know what we know, and how when models of our understanding break, that's a great thing, and that means new innovation and new discoveries coming. That's at the core of what we're trying to do. In that process, we're hoping that kids and teachers can see that, hey, science also does a really good job of teaching you really important skills, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, all of those skills, collaboration. It's just a really good vehicle for enhancing those skills, and those skills are going to help you wherever you go. And then out of that, perhaps there are those really, really keen kids who are going to solve those next big scientific questions. They'll be twigged to science and they'll follow that path.
I noticed you used the word science, again, never physics. I'm assuming that's on purpose.
That's on purpose from the educator in me. The teacher in me wanted to be broader than physics. Physics, probably because of that original story, or on the I hated physics, but I loved the learning. Physics can sometimes be a stumbling block. It's everywhere around, so try to de-escalate the tension that the word creates.
Yeah, I know. I have an engineering background, so I've always seen the physics as being the pinnacle of science. So there's some quote about stamp collecting in physics, but I move towards that. But I think you're right. If it's probably a better goal to have just an appreciation for the scientific method and how you approach a problem, and what it means to take a scientific point of view.
And I don't think that in any way stops us from hoping that some of those kids with that bent do then follow a path, and maybe follow a path to do physics. But it's not the goal. It's rather a symptom of success.
Okay, so then I guess then there wouldn't also be a goal of like gender or how pulling both genders into science.
There is. The diversity and gender equity and just diversity in general, that's top of mind whenever we're making resources or we're working with teachers. It's about recognizing the barriers that are put up and helping to remove them. It's not where we're hoping that there'll be pick a science top coding, that there would be exactly 50-50 of your class of coders. There might be. It might swing way one way, it might swing way the other. It will go naturally where it needs to go if you can actively remove those biases.
Now, I'm assuming that gender gap is still in the range of 10%, 90%. I'm assuming that. Don't have recent data.
A really good counterpoint to that, it's challenging. Physics probably has one of the most challenging gender gaps or gender disparity. But our Sci program, which is a master's level program, this year it's 30 students, 34 students. It's 1 or 2 students away from being gender.
Wonderful.
And it's a sign of what you can do if you.
So what's do you have an opinion on the aptitude between the sexes? I mean,
there's no question, as different as two brothers and sisters and brothers and sisters are, the aptitude is there across the planet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there
it really is just exposing at the right age.
It's situational, and it's interest, and there's a study that out of the UK, you're probably familiar with the Aspire study about successful STEM career folks, and they looked at what is that correlation, and it turns out it's moments to engage with STEM with your family, and they call that science capital. So, and that there was a gender interesting piece. If you engaged with science capital with your mom, that was even most important. Now, that's a totally different direction than we normally come at it from.
How do you see it changing in the future? I mean, if you looked at either how you teach science in 5 years from now, like what an instructor is doing, or maybe the resources that you would be providing. If you were predicting the future 5 years from now, what do you think it would look like?
Yeah, I know, it keeps me up at night. In the end, it has to be
a pill for that, by the way.
Good. It's individualized learning. It really must be. The 1 to 35 kids or 1 to 200 kids in a university, that's one mode, and sometimes it's perfect. When you're sitting quietly and you want to hear from an expert about some topic, it's a great way to just absorb that piece. But in terms of true learning and concept development and taking the understanding from one spot to a new spot, it's not the best, and we know it's not the best. There needs to be interaction. You have to wrestle with it on your own. You have to wrestle with it with colleagues. So it has to be the individualization of learning, with opportunities to be collaborative with your students. But you can't just always collaborate. Group work isn't the answer either.
Yeah, sometimes it's deep thinking. Like we have a saying here, you learn by doing. I think anyone who's been through a STEM course, that you sit in the lecture, or at least you think you're paying attention. You actually think quite often you get it. and you're humbled as soon as you begin trying to do the assignment for the week.
That's there. When I was still teaching, we implemented a new system in our school, and actually it was in about maybe 20 schools over the province over a little bit of time. But we were sort of leading the charge, and what it was is it took classes and it shortened them by 15 minutes. So instead of 4 75-minute periods, the school had 5 one-hour periods. That 1 hour was sprinkled across the timetables of students. And what I asked my kids to do was, don't go out of this class straight into your MSIP class and start doing the problems. Go over what we just talked about. Make it your own. And in giving that advice, I also tried to take that advice and did it myself in terms of thinking about how the lesson went. And I asked the kids about how they're understanding. And it was dramatic how that changed the way they learned. It even changed the way they behaved in class, because they knew they were grappling with the thinking during class, then they'd go and make it their own. And sometimes they wouldn't even do the questions, or they'd do 1 or 2 and then they were easy. But you're exactly right. It's a different process.
Now, so we sort of left, maybe I want to go back to how you see the role of the instructor in the future. But maybe let's get there via what you think of, flipping the classroom. Because what you just described, that could be a flipped classroom, where you're expecting someone to review something before, and you, as opposed to after class, making it their own, you spend the whole class doing it that way.
Yeah, the flipped classroom is now, it's such an easy moniker. I think it's really taken a life of its own. But probably if we go back far enough in education, it's actually how we learn. You wrestle with something, you're working with each other. And that's what we're trying to do. If we're making resources that can help support a teacher in doing that, or at least providing those kinds of opportunities, that's where our focus always is. When we're building resources to grapple with science concepts, physics concepts, how we package it is always a challenge, because you can, for any number of reasons, but it never is, well, it's always more than a video or a PowerPoint for the teacher to stand and deliver. There's something to do.
I think physics in particular is a rich ground of doing wonderful 3D simulations and animation. I mean, it's so, I consider it sort of the Harry Potter book, where stuff moves. Why would you not engage someone in this day and age with I mean, the one reason is it takes a long time to create those resources. But assuming that you have a measurement to show that they work better, why would you not, over time, take those steps to develop better material?
And I think your data that you will amass, and when that becomes clear, it'll help all the way through the chain, from convincing teachers and students it's the right way to go, but the policymakers and the funders.
That's right.
And that's crucial.
And even like broader, like parents, or someone. Yeah. Someone is paying for an education. The parents, the students, sometimes the governments. Someone should be asking the question, okay, well, what are we paying for? Yeah. And I think for the first time, we'll have the ability to begin answering that question in a quantitative way that we've never had before.
That's incredible, and that will help make good decisions.
We do, and I do think that online education generally is at a stage where it's just coming out of the stage where it was more flexible, more convenient, and more scalable, more cost-effective. But I think we're moving into a new stage where that's not enough. It has to be better, more, and I think it should be, or my premise would be, if standing in front of a small group of students face to face is better teaching than an online classroom, well, then something's broken. And I think we're at the stage of it has to be more than just convenient, scalable, and cost-effective. Yeah. It has to be better.
Yeah. It's a small window into that, and it's your team gave us something for our we have a summer camp, ISSYP. It's 40 kids from around the globe come to Perimeter for 2 weeks. in preparation for that, they want to make sure they have a level of math competency. And it's more, they have it, we know they have it before we pick them, but they have their own internal anxiety around it, and they want to make sure they're coming ready for this physics summer camp. And your team gave us an asset that allows them to work through the math. It does a diagnostic for them, and then it leads them to that level of competency. And that is very individualized, and it physically made their experience pre-camp better, and they articulate that. And that's one small little window.
Well, it's nice too that it's immediate feedback. I grew up, and you probably did as well, where you would think you would know a subject. You know, you had read the chapter or whatever.
Yes.
You would take a quiz or an examination of some type. It would be marked, and so that would be at least a 2-week period before you got your feedback, versus getting feedback more or less instantaneously, like within minutes, and being surprised if you didn't know something. So I think tightening that feedback loop is huge all by itself.
It's really, and it's allows for finer grain. You can slice the feedback into it's not, I don't know how to do this, it's this part of my understanding.
That's right. And then what I hope that will happen with the data, and that we can rate, not only because we do a lot of rating of the students and even the teachers of how well, but you can rate the content, and if you can, the best content can bubble to the top, you know, and wouldn't that be, you know, if someone was being taught with the best content available worldwide, or maybe worldwide in the English-speaking world, like, yeah, how much more could they get through? How much more could they comprehend?
That little alarm that went off, not alarm, the exciting ring that went off in my mind when you said that. In terms of content and vetting content systematically like that, early on in my career, the best that we could do there was for those final exam, those multiple choice questions, where you would rate the value of each multiple choice question. You'd look at your top students and bottom students and compare their questions. If there was questions that were being, you know, it answered here but not here, or here but not here. Anyway, this process allowed us to whittle down multiple choice questions. Big, arduous process. In the end, you actually had much more coherent set of test questions. All this for, you know, one exam that then you shouldn't really reuse, but ends up getting reused again and again.
Does, yeah.
To think that you could make that process be part of their day-to-day life, a teacher would thrive off of the ability to.
We work with DTU in Europe, and they have an interesting model where they present a randomized test to students, and they work in teams. So they're on their own, but they're working in teams of 6. But every student within the 6, they get the same type of question, but randomized. So it's not enough just for them to do, for one to do it. I'll do one, you do two, and we'll copy. They have to each do their own set of questions, but they work in it as a team. So it's wonderful that they work together, they get that human interaction, and yet they're solving their own particular problems. So it doesn't prevent cheating, but it sure helps.
And and to try to replicate that on your own it would be impossible. There's too many variations. The fact that you're able to provide an asset to, that's incredible.
Yeah, that just can be randomized.